So what we will be doing today is providing you with a training on the use of a new web application called NUTRI-Fourrager. And what this application or tool allows you to do is essentially to estimate the nutritive value of forages in the field before the harvest. Okay, so hopefully that's a tool that you will appreciate and that could eventually become useful in your activities. So essentially the plan today is to present this tool, but also provide you some context or background into how we developed this application, the research at its basis, and then we will essentially demonstrate how to make the measurements in the field that are required to input into the web application. And finally, at the end, I'll demonstrate the use of this application, and we will conclude with a question section. And we'll ask you to keep your question for the end of the presentation to make sure that we stay within the time allocated for this activity. And I would like first to mention that this training was developed in collaboration with my collaborator, Huguette Martel, who's an agronomist at the MAPAC. And also Gaetan Tremblay, which is a research scientist at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So they will join me at the end of the presentation to answer any question that you may have regarding this application. So thank you, Huguette and Gaetan. So essentially today, like I said, the goal is to provide you some training on the use of this new application. And like I mentioned before, I will initiate this training by providing you with some background or context. So first of all, as you probably know, forage quality is a key component of dairy farm profitability, given that feeds are an important input cost on dairy operations. NDF concentration is considered by several a key forage quality variable. There are several that exist, but this is one that is pretty universally used to assess a forage nutritive value. And it's essential to harvest forage crop at the right moment to reach a target NDF concentration value. And you may wonder, okay, what is this target NDF concentration, what we should aim for? It's not something I will elaborate on, because really the target value will depend on the animal type. For example, is it a dry cow, a cow in first lactation, etc., but also the level of production of the animal. So it's really the target NDF concentration value must be defined, for example, in consultation with your agronomist. And one thing to keep in mind is that once you define what is this target NDF concentration, is that the NDF concentration of forages, as we'll see soon, is rapidly changing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Just a small reminder in terms of what NDF is, what it stands for. Essentially, it stands for neutral detergent fiber, and essentially it represents the amount of, or the concentration of, three components of forages: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And why these are important, or why it's important to monitor or quantify these in forages, well, essentially it's because the NDF value is linked to intake by ruminant animal, the forage intake, and also it's important as it's linked directly to rumination of ruminant animal, and this has a direct impact on rumen health. According to a study conducted by scientists from Valacta a few years back, it reported that when the NDF concentration of forages changed from 53%, which is the average of forage harvested in Quebec, to 48%, the concentrate cost is reduced from $12.5 to $9.8 per hectoliter of milk. Okay, so we see that if we translate that to a typical dairy operation in Quebec, this would represent a difference of more than $16,000 per year in feed costs. So we see that the NDF value of forages will have an impact on profitability of dairy operations. I mentioned earlier that NDF concentration of forages can change quite quickly. When we look at the graph on the right side of the slide, we can see your data from a research project that was conducted at 3 different contrasted sites throughout Quebec for your typical alfalfa timothy mixture for the first growth period, so leading to the first harvest. And what we can see on the x-axis is that we have the growing days growing from 0 to 30 days of growth. And on the y-axis, we have the percent NDF. And what we can see here is essentially the evolution or the progression of the percent NDF in the forage. And essentially what this data shows is that the NDF concentration can increase by 0.5% unit per day, essentially. So what this means that a delay in harvest can have an important impact on forage nutritive value. So a method to estimate forage nutritive value prior harvest in the field is required, definitely would be a welcome tool for producer and agronomist. This being said, this method must be simple, quick, and economical. So this leads us to the PEAQ model, so the PEAQ predictive model, and PEAQ stands for Predictive Equations for Alfalfa Quality. And PEAQ is based on simple measurements made in the field, and it's currently the most promising method. And this is a method that was initially developed at the University of Wisconsin. And this approach was initially developed for pure alfalfa stand, and is based on the height and stage of development of alfalfa. So essentially, if we measure those two variables, then we're able to estimate NDF concentration of forages. It was adapted for use in alfalfa grass mixture at Cornell University, and this is of interest to us in Quebec because if PEAQ seems to have potential, we have to remember that in Quebec, as it is the case in great parts of New York State, is that we rarely going to have producers that are growing alfalfa in pure stands. Usually it's going to be alfalfa grass mixture. So the adaptation or modification of initial PEAQ predictive equations for situations or alfalfa grass mixtures is more applicable to our situation. So essentially, PEAQ could be used in a range of environments according to data. Some variants were developed for alfalfa grass mixture in New York State. However, these should be validated for use in Quebec before use. And this leads to the research that is at the base of the development of this web application, which is called NUTRI-Fourrager. And this was from a research project that I will very briefly present in the next few slides. And it was a project that was funded by both the provincial, the Programme Innovation, that is supported by both the provincial and federal government. So the objective of this project was to determine if PEAQ equations developed for alfalfa grass mixtures in New York State by scientists from Cornell University could be used under Quebec conditions. And then the second objective of that project was to develop equations specific to local Quebec conditions. And you can see on the right side of the slide one of the scientific publications that was generated from this project, and which really generated, as we'll see, equations or models that are at the base of Nutrifoliage. So what were the conclusions of this research project? Well, there were two main conclusions. The first was that equations developed in New York State have potential, but they are biased when used locally in Quebec. And what we did is we add a network, essentially, as you can see in the map at the bottom of this slide. So we evaluated those New York State models, but also the ones that we developed locally in Quebec. And what we found is that across 12 regions of Quebec that was really covering most of the province, ranging from Abitibi-Témiscamingue to Gaspésie, going through the areas between Montreal and Quebec City, is that the equations that were developed in Quebec gave better results when used on local Quebec commercial farms. So this led to the generation of the development of new equations, and they are really, as I mentioned before, at the base of this web application called Nutrifoliage. So what this web application allows you to do, it allows the estimation of the nutritive value of forages, namely alfalfa grass mixtures, in the field prior harvest. So at the moment it's only available in French, but we'll demonstrate, you'll see the use of the application. It estimates two nutritive value indices or measures or values. It estimates NDF concentration, on which we will focus today for this training, but also, and we'll briefly present, it allows you also to estimate the relative feed value of your forages. So essentially, it's a decision-making tool helping to identify the most appropriate time to harvest alfalfa grass mixtures. And it can be used for the first and second harvest, although I want to underline that the validation step of those equations was used using samples on commercial farm only for the first harvest. But the equations or models were developed for both first and second harvest. So I mentioned that it allows you to estimate the NDF concentration of forages, but also the relative feed value. And very briefly, if you're not familiar with the RFV concept, it is one that was developed also in the States and used mainly by producers of commercial A in the Midwest. And it's a measurement that integrates both NDF and ADF concentration. So in this table, you can see in French, but essentially what it gives you an indication or associate possible RFV value, which in French are VAR, okay? Essentially what those corresponds to in terms of quality. So if you're looking at values over 151 RFV, essentially this will correspond to a forage of excellent quality. If you have values that range between 125 and 151, well, this corresponds to a very good quality forage, etc. Okay, so essentially, I don't want to spend too much time on it because not a value that is very much used here, but it's an interesting value that again incorporate both NDF and ADF concentrations. So the question then becomes, okay, we know what this application allows us to do. What do we need in order to use Nutrifoliage? So essentially, you'll need, we'll see simple things that we need. So what is the material required? The first thing, we'll need quadrat of 50 by 50 centimeter. We can see in the picture here that we have quadrat made out of PCV tubing. It doesn't need to be done out of this. What's important is really that it's 50 by 50. It can be made of metal, it can be made of wood, PVC as we see here. The material is not important. We also need a ruler of at least 1 meter. We also need some scissors, plastic bags, a scale, and it doesn't have to be something very fancy, just like a typical kitchen scale will be sufficient. Internet access to be able to access Nutrifoliage. And then we recommend that you do 5 measurements in the same field. And why we recommend 5 measurements in the same field? Because the more measurements you're going to have, the more representative the sampling will be, and the more accurate your estimation of the nutritive value of your forage will be. So that's something important to keep in mind, is don't try to cut corners and say, okay, I will do only 2 measurements. The more measurement, the more accurate your estimations will be. So what we should measure, essentially, If you're interested in estimating NDF concentration of your forages, we need to measure three things. We need to determine the length of the tallest alfalfa stem, the length of the tallest grass stem, and the alfalfa proportion in the mixture. And we'll see that it's the most problematic one to determine. This is if you want to estimate the NDF value of forage. If you're interested to also define instead the RFV value, then you need to measure a fourth thing, which is or determine which is the developmental stage of the most mature alfalfa stem. So again, the first three is common to both measurements. The fourth one is only for RFV determination. So now what we're going to do is look at a series of short clips. They are in French, but you'll see it's very visual, and essentially it's going to show you in the field how to make those determinations. For example, we'll start with the first one, which is the length of the tallest alfalfa stem. So it should be okay. You see the link at the bottom of the screen here. If you have any problems sometime, as François Carl mentioned, depending if you selected the flash version of the VIA website, you may not be able to see it. So we'll start with the first one. Again, they are in French, but you'll see it's very visual. And the first video will last a minute.
Cette vidéo sert à préciser la technique pour déterminer la longueur de la tige de luzerne la plus haute. Cinq échantillons représentatifs par champ sont recommandés pour maximiser la fiabilité de la prédiction. Il faut s'assurer que tous les plants soient à l'intérieur du quadrat. On cherche parmi les plants de luzerne à l'intérieur du quadrat pour identifier celle avec la tige la plus haute. La mesure se prend à l'extrémité de la tige et non pas de la feuille, du bouton ou de la floraison terminale.
So we saw in the first video how to determine the length of the tallest alfalfa stem. Now we're going to look at the second one, which is how to determine the length of the tallest grass stem. So again, it's going to be a video of a length of 1 minute.
Cette vidéo sert à préciser la technique pour déterminer la longueur de la tige de graminée la plus haute. 5 échantillons représentatifs par champ sont recommandés pour maximiser la fiabilité de la prédiction. Il faut s'assurer que tous les plants soient à l'intérieur du quadrat. On cherche parmi les plants de graminées à l'intérieur du quadrat pour identifier celui avec la tige la plus haute. La mesure se prend en étirant la feuille étendard. On ne tient pas compte de l'inflorescence si la plante est épiée.
So now we're going to move to the third measurement, as we'll see that will be the one that is a little bit more difficult to determine, and it's that of the proportion of alfalfa in the mixture. So again, we're going to watch a brief video that this time will be slightly longer. It's going to be a video of about 2 minutes.
Cette vidéo présente comment évaluer la proportion de luzerne dans le mélange fourragé. Vous aurez besoin d'un quadrat, de ciseaux et d'un sac de plastique. Vous aurez aussi besoin d'une balance. 5 échantillons représentatifs par champ sont recommandés pour maximiser la fiabilité de la prédiction. Il faut s'assurer que tous les plants soient à l'intérieur du quadrat. Coupez les tiges du quadrat à une hauteur de 7,5 cm. Insérez cette biomasse dans un sac de plastique pour ultérieurement procéder à la séparation botanique et à la pesée individuelle de chaque échantillon. Procédez à la séparation botanique de la luzerne et des graminées de l'échantillon. Pour plus de détails sur la composition botanique de l'échantillon, consultez la foire aux questions. Procédez à la pesée de la luzerne. Ajoutez ensuite les tiges de graminées pour obtenir le poids total. L'application divise le poids de la luzerne sur le poids total et calcule ainsi la proportion de luzerne dans le mélange. La précision de l'exécution de la coupe, de la séparation botanique et des pesées est importante et directement reliée à la fiabilité de la prédiction.
So we've seen now to determine the proportion of alfalfa in the mixture, and is this step that's going to be a little bit more complex, takes more time, but we want to underline that this is really a critical step. As much as we said that's important to not minimize the number of quadrats we will take to input data into the application, we want to also underline that you have to be very careful because the tool really requires a precise determination of the proportion of alfalfa in the mixture, because models develop really depends on this determination. And if you input an imprecise or incorrect value of alfalfa proportion, well, this will translate into an incorrect estimation of the NDF concentration. So that's crucial to keep that in mind. Visual estimation could be seen by some as being an alternative, a quicker one. However, how precise those visual estimations will be depends on the evaluator and his or her expertise, and it is thus not recommended. And just to illustrate this fact, here you have data from the research project I referred to earlier on in the presentation. And in this graph, we see some data that contrasts the proportion of alfalfa that is predicted visually. So here, essentially, we had those quadrats as we saw in the procedure just in the previous video, those 50 by 50 centimeter quadrat. And then essentially what the person did was different technicians or advisor, well, they look at the area 50 by 50 centimeter, and then they make a visual determination of the proportion of alfalfa. So essentially they said, okay, there is essentially here we'll focus on the value 50%. So what these people did, look at the quadrat, the biomass in there, and says, well, I think that's 50% alfalfa. And what you see is that on the y-axis, we see the values for the proportion, the real proportion or real value. And what we can see from this is that the real values range between about 65% and 5%. So it means that some people look at the quadrat, says there's 50% alfalfa in there, and in reality, there was only 5%. And the other extreme, well, they thought it was 50. See that, for example, for the person who said there was 50 and there's 5 of values, and we can see that, for example, for the person who said there was 50 and there's 5, there were 5% alfalfa. Well, that's a mistake of 45% that will go in the model. So what's going to be the impact of this is that essentially the NDF value that will come out of the program essentially will be wrong. Okay, so just to reiterate on that and illustrate that, what I would like to do is a small activity together, and we will have two pictures in this slide and the next one that illustrate a real situation, a real case from which those data were produced, the graph on the previous slide. And essentially we see one of those quadrats fairly early on in the season, and you see it's a mixture of grass and alfalfa. And what I would like to do is use in the chat box, I would like you to estimate visually how much you think alfalfa is in there. So let's take a few seconds, and please, you're not graded on this or anything, just tell me what you think there is. So we have 10% here, alfalfa. Let's see what are the other. Don't be shy. Only feel, oh, okay, 25%. Now the other participant, oh, 30, good. Last chance to participate, 25%. So we see that there is a range. No, you don't have to bid money. We'll see if you were successful. Anyway, nobody would have won, but if we do the prices right, Christine would be the winner, essentially, because you're the closest without overbidding. So essentially, we see the real proportion was 40%, essentially here. But we see that we had range from 10 to 30%. So we see that there was some error there, and the error that was made in the estimation would be again reflected in the value that would have been generated. So we will do another one, and we see that's a little bit later in the season. The quadrat's still there, but because the vegetation is taller, we cannot see it. But just imagine that about 2/3 of the picture represents the area where you need to determine or estimate the proportion of alfalfa. So I'll ask you the same thing to estimate the proportion of alfalfa, and again, it's on a biomass basis. So give you some time. So let's see what are your numbers, how much you think there is. So we have 40% here, 65, 60, still a chance to put your numbers, estimation. And yeah, we can't see the quadrat because it's the vegetation is much taller. But so what was the real value? 78%. So we see again there was quite a bit of error here in the estimation. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible to get the right value, but you see that we had a range here, and again, the further you are from the real value, well, the greater the error. So we just did that kind of exercise to illustrate the importance to not minimize this step, and we recognize that it takes time and it's a limiting factor, but that's the only way that you're going to get accurate value. So now what we're going to do, now that we have the background, we look at how to perform those measurements, I'm going to illustrate the use of the web application. And you have the address, the web address, so you'll be able to go by yourself after this to try it. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through the application. Okay, so this is the page layout that you would see if you're using a laptop or a desktop computer. Right now I'm using my laptop, so this is how it looks like. If you're using the application, the website in a cell phone, it would look slightly different. It's really the layout that will change, but the different steps will not vary, so don't worry about it. A few things that you see here on the left side, you see a number. So here you have 1. So this will progress through 1, 2, 3, 4, and ultimately 5 as we go through the different steps that are required in order to generate the estimation. You have an FAQ here, essentially that is a page where you're going to have a general question that you may have and answers for them. In the top right, you can see that you have some training tools. So if I click on this, you will see a series of videos. Essentially, you'll see the first 3 ones starting from the left are the videos that we watched together so far. So how to determine the longer alfalfa stem, grass stem, the proportion of alfalfa in the mixture. And then we'll look at that a little bit later. But if you're interested in estimating the RFV, essentially you'll need to determine the most mature alfalfa stem, and that's the video. And you have also a video, the last one on the right, which present the tool, globally. It's a slightly longer video, 5 minutes, that present every step required for the use of the web application. So once we've done that, we know these, we're going to illustrate. So we're going to make a prediction. So we click first on Faire une prédiction. And then you're going to have more information here. You can see here at the step 1, which is the identification. We have I here, which is for information. It gives you some more detailed information. For example, on that first step, it specified that the data that you're going to input into the website are not kept on any server, so don't worry about confidentiality or these issues. It's just data that are put, and you will see, so that you can, things like we ask for your email, essentially, so that it at the end, once you've generated the estimation, it can be emailed to your personal email, but these data are not kept. So essentially, we'll start. We'll say that we make an estimation here on the 14th of July. We'll do put the name of the farm, so it's a hypothetical case. We have the McDonald farm. We have the name of the field, so we'll say it's field 2, for example, of the McDonald farm. And then we put an email, which is, I'll make a fake email, so don't try to email me at that email address. Okay, so we have the information, so we've input all the required information. We click on Étape suivante to go to the next step. And here we're going to select the cut that we want. So it can be for the first or the second cut. Now we're at the second cut. So we'll illustrate only the NDF value. So we're going to ask for an estimate of the NDF value. We'll see that for the RFV value, it's very similar. Again, here we're going to have another type of information tool. This little square with the 2 arrows, it's to expand. And we have here the essentially the table I showed you before that provides you a little bit information about the RFV, or valeur alimentaire relative in French, so you can gauge yourself in terms of what the result may correspond in terms of other values that you may be more familiar with. So this being said, for the illustration of how to use, I will only use the generate an estimation for the NDF concentration of forage. So now that we've selected that second cut, we want to estimate NDF value. We're going to click on Étape suivante, so next step. So here we're going to input the data that we collected in the field in those 5 quadrats as shown in those short clips. And just for sake of time, I'm just going to input data for 2 of the quadrat. I said you really need to, put as many data from as many quadrats as possible. We recommend 5, but just for sake of time, I'm just going to put 2 data for 2 quadrats. So you can see you can expand, the box of data entry by clicking on those arrows. Okay, so I'll input data, again, hypothetical data for 2 quadrats. So let's say I've been in the field, I've made the measurement as illustrated before earlier in the training. So the length of my tallest alfalfa stem is 63 centimeter. For the grass, it's 69. And for the proportion of alfalfa, we weighted 80 grams of alfalfa on a total of 115 grams. So this gives us an alfalfa proportion of 70%. And then I go in the next one, and I'm going to put 68 centimeter that was measured for alfalfa, and 93 for the tallest grass stem. Finally, in terms of alfalfa proportion, we had 63 gram on a total of 120 gram. 20, that gave us 52% alfalfa. So I would continue, do the same thing for quadrant 3, 4, and 5. And one important thing to mention here is that despite that you're going to enter data for 2 or 5 quadrats, once we generate the estimated, request the estimation of the NDF value, we're only going to get a single value. That will represent the average of those 2 or 5 quadrats data. Okay, so you're not going to, if I put now data from 2 quadrats, I'm not going to get 2 estimations. I'm just going to get an average for the entire field based on those subsamples or quadrat that I took. Okay. So we click on étape suivante to go to the next step. And now we're going to define that target value I mentioned before. So really, I don't want to elaborate on this. Again, you need to define that as an agronome, agrologist, if you're one yourself, or depending on needs of your client, or if you're a producer using this tool, you will define that with your agrologist. And essentially, you're just for illustrating this example, I will set, again, a hypothetical value of 48% NDF. Okay. So then I click on the next step, so étape suivante. And now we're ready. It's at the last step. We're going to launch the calculation. And this is it. We're at the last step, step 5, where we have our results. So we see we have the data for today, 14th of July, 2020, for McDonald Farm, field 2. So we requested an estimation of the NDF concentration for the second cut. And what we have the average of those 2 quadrat data we inputted. So we see the average height of the longest alfalfa stem was 65.5 centimeter, 81 centimeter for the grass, 61% alfalfa, and the result that we got for the NDF value is 42. So if our target NDF value was 48, we're still 6% from it. So essentially we have some information here at the bottom. So we see that it's not ready to harvest at the moment. It says that it should be ready in 7 to 14 days. And it suggested that the person who used the tool resampled within a week to see if the situation has evolved and that the target value has been reached. So we've completed the estimation. Then you have a last step. Because of the data we entered in the step 1, we may elect to send this report to that email address that was specified earlier. We can print, or we can launch a new prediction and start over. So essentially, you can see this fairly simple. This is how to use this tool. So now I'll go back to the PowerPoint presentation. And I will just provide a little bit more detail if you're interested in generating the RFV value. And you, like I mentioned before, you still need to get the 3 measurements that were illustrated for generating the NDF value. But in addition, you also need to determine what is the alfalfa developmental stage for the most mature stem. And essentially, you have this table. And you have here a link to the document in AgriRéseau. In this document, if you search it on the web, it's available both in French and English. So this would be available in English. But essentially, you see here that it's based on an index value that will, which you need to rank the alfalfa maturity on a stage range from 0 to 9. But in most cases, you will usually have, the values that range between 2 and 6 for the most. Okay, so it would be rare that you go beyond that. So essentially, you're going to assess that and assign a value based on this table. And if we illustrate that with some pictures, you can see what a stage 3, stage 4, 5, and 6, which are the most common one you would see in a field. While stage 3 corresponds to early bud stage. You can see here, for example, that stem with 1 node with a bud. Stage 4 late bud, you see 4 nodes with buds. At stage 5, we see 1 node with an open flower, and at stage 6, we see 3 nodes with open flowers. So we're at stage 6. So essentially, again, this is all those pictures are available in this document that's available in French, but also in English if you look for it on the web. So now we're going to look at our last video, which essentially it's another video about a minute long that will illustrate how you can determine what is the alfalfa developmental stage.
Cette vidéo présente comment déterminer le stade de maturité de la tige de luzerne la plus développée. 5 échantillons représentatifs par champ sont recommandés pour maximiser la fiabilité de la prédiction. Observez les différentes tiges de luzerne dans le quadrat afin de déterminer laquelle est la plus mature. On voit ici que c'est la tige de luzerne qui a un bouton floral. Utilisez le tableau sur les stades de développement de la luzerne disponible dans l'application pour vous aider à identifier correctement le stade de la luzerne. Dans ce cas, la luzerne est au stade 3. Vous trouverez des images pour chaque stade dans ce document disponible sur Agri Réseau.
So now we've seen how to make that fourth measurement. And essentially it's only if you want to estimate the RFV value. So now essentially it completes the training. What I want to provide you at this point is a data set that you will be able to use for 5 quadrats, and I suggest you try those numbers and input them into the Nutrifoliage web application. And once you enter those data, you should be reach an estimated value of NDF of 42% and a relative feed value of 135. So if you input that, so this is just an example, so you can try after this training whenever you want this tool with some numbers. Okay. So in conclusion, Nutrifoliage allows the estimation of NDF and/or RFV of alfalfa grass mixtures in the field prior harvest. This becomes a decision-making tool for the first and second harvest. It's a user-friendly web interface that we hope will be useful for you. We want to stress again that a key element of using this tool will depend on generating a precise determination of the alfalfa proportion, as it's a key element of generating good estimates of NDF concentration. The same apply for if you want to determine RFV values. So on this, I would like to proceed with some acknowledgement at this point. First from the people from the CRAAQ that are behind this project. So first, Denise Bachan, chargée de projet, as responsible for the project coordination. Also, Tommy Genet and Mario Vincent Gago that are responsible for web development for this beautiful application we now have. In terms of the research that's really at the base, that is just behind this web application. First of all, Shane Wood, that was the master student that did his thesis on this project, and also all the collaborators, I won't name them all, but that we have from AFC, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, from MAPAC, Valacta and Lactanet. Thank you very much. And also, without them, this would have been impossible. Really sincere thanks to all the commercial farms and agricultural producers that allowed us to sample on their operation throughout the 12 regions of Quebec to validate this tool. And also in that effort, all the MAPAC advisors that contributed to this sampling. So thank you, without naming them all today, as well as those from Valacta Lactanet, so the advisor from both organizations. Thank you very much. So here are a few references that are linked to the background or context that I mentioned earlier on in this training, that you could consult if you want more information regarding peak and related research.